There seems to be almost a collapse, it seems, of the U.S. political system, and it really is accelerating under the Trump 2.0 regime. What's your assessment of this, given this internecine conflict, as Carl put it?
Yeah, look, it's clearly symptomatic or an embodiment of a dysfunctional mess. And it's a dysfunctional mess in the governmental institutions and structures of the American body politic that reflects a reality that an elite class is incapable and unwilling to address the fundamental issues that currently confront the United States, and they go to the nature of the economic structure, the distribution of wealth, and the social fragmentation that is unfolding before our very, very eyes. It's an incoherent mess in part because the politics has become largely a politics of cultural grievance mixed in with a heavy dose of nostalgia, because that's how you mobilize voter groups. You run election campaigns based around sound bites that appeal to people's emotional reactions and target their sense of betrayal and anger as a result of the economic failures of the system at large. And we now have a situation 10 months on, or 11 months on, from the inauguration of the second Trump administration, where the deep-seated contradictions in the political program, for what that's worth, are now starting to become very, very apparent. Carl touched on some of those. The promises made to one group ultimately contradict the obligations that the administration politically has to another group. And these contradictions are not going to resolve themselves in an easy, tie a bow around it kind of way. Rather, what they do is that they give rise to these kinds of fragmentations amongst the elite. But the fragmentation at the elite level, I think, also represents one more thing, and that is the fact that the coalition of demographic groups that came around the second Trump campaign, or the third Trump campaign and the second Trump administration, is actually a very, very fragile coalition. And unless something dramatically changes in the political economy and the social settlement of the United States, then the anger and the displacement anxieties that people experience now are simply not going to go away. So this is really the bubbling at the surface of deep-seated problems.
Yeah, Warwick, in October, there was no jobs report. There's lots of talk in Western media throughout both the US and Europe about a recession. What are some of the economic dimensions then of this kind of war that we are seeing inside of the United States emerge, or what could be simply internecine conflict, as Carl put it? But what exactly are the economic dimensions of this, given that there's all kinds of anxieties about a coming recession, jobs, this sort of thing happening in the United States?
Well, the masses of American working people and working families have seen the quality of their lives go backwards now in real terms for the best part of 4 to 5 decades. So in that sense, what's going on now is not new. It's the ongoing processes by which a growing proportion, and arguably the majority now of Americans, are living in a nightmare rather than being able to fulfill the promises of the American dream. We saw very concrete evidence of that during the period of the government shutdown, when the administration refused to process and pay basically food coupons, right? And we're talking about 13% of Americans actually reliant upon these coupon payments to be able to put food on the table. Now, this marries up with US Department of Agriculture data, which estimates that some 13.8% of American households now experience food insecurity. If a state cannot ensure that its population is adequately fed, then it's actually failing in one of the most basic responsibilities of a state. And this is where I think the American body politic has ultimately gotten to. It hasn't gotten here by accident or overnight. And the other dimension to what's going on in the real world and the world of real workers, real families, and the real economy is, of course, the world of the elites. And we have a network of elites that intertwine the interests of finance capital, technology capital, and military capital, as well as the assorted cultural appendages of these institutions of economic power. And we have an administration that is, for the first time, I think, and this perhaps is a plus for the administration, if anything, but actually is unashamedly open to being a central figure in what is in effect American crony capitalism, where pardons can obviously be bought. At least in the past, there were pretenses that they weren't bought, but now we have an explicit price discovery mechanism where assisting Trump family related cryptocurrency projects, for example, gives you a pathway to pardons, where the Trump family businesses are advertising and promoting Trump branded products through the American military institutions, or of course when the president himself holds press conferences with a former terrorist who is now a welcome guest in the White House, and he sprays around the best cologne that has ever been invented. Right, so we've got the explicit intertwining now of the interests of finance together with the interests of the political class. And the last example that I'll raise is the growing tentacles that combine the interests of the military establishment, and this includes, of course, those interests close to Israel, together with the technology interests of the new cohort of big tech. So I'm not talking about the big tech that was the legacy of the first Cold War, but it's the new big tech of big data, AI, surveillance, etc., etc. This is where I think the American political and economic institutions have evolved to, and perhaps we're at the high watermark, if you will, because they're no longer a secret. Everyone can see them, and perhaps in time people will realize that these two things that I've described are deeply connected, that the vast majority of Americans are doing it tough for the very reasons that a small proportion of Americans are increasingly doing better.
Carl, as all of this was going on with regard to the whole Marjorie Taylor Greene, Trump feud, there was MBS visiting the White House, and there was also a forum that was happening between, the Saudi-U.S. business forum, and that forum led to major takeaways from their meeting. Trump granted Saudi Arabia major non-NATO ally status, giving expedited access to military hardware. He confirmed that there will be a sale of F-35s to Riyadh without downgrades, and dismissed critics in the Republican Party who said that only Israel should have access to this for their qualitative military edge. He also said that eventually Saudi investments in the United States will equal $1 trillion US dollars, which is about the size, I believe, of the entire Saudi Arabia economy. So, Carl, talk about the significance of this. Where does it fit in? Because on the one hand, you have the Trump administration getting into major splits and divisions at home, especially over this Epstein crisis, which is going to haunt, it seems like, the administration for quite some time. And then you have the wheelings and dealings of the Trump administration abroad, which have taken many forms, including this one. What's your reaction?
The U.S. regime is now trying to shore up its position in West Asia, because a lot of these Gulf monarchies have been hedging. They have been hedging by talking about pricing oil in RMB, for example, and all these moves are to serve a notice to Washington. Hey, you're gonna still need us. You're gonna need us for petrodollar. You're gonna need us for to maintain your hegemonic position in the Persian Gulf. And so this is the kind of concession that Trump is now giving to MBS to assure MBS, look, as long as we are buddies, there will still be benefit. But any kind of association with United States is not cost free. Like one thing that Trump really hate is for quote unquote U.S. ally to ride the coattails of U.S. empire. So Saudi has to pay for the privilege of being in the American imperial system. For that, they need to plow all their dollar surplus that they have gained from exporting oil and gas into U.S. and this is can take the preferred way for the U.S. administration would like to see all these Gulf money to come fund the AI bubble, the incipient AI bubble in United States. That the whole 500 billion Stargate project. Where do all this money supposed to come from? They're expecting the Gulf monarchies to fund them, and so this is what's it really about. It's like what Dr. Powell has said about this collusion of financial capital and the big tech capital in United States. A lot of it's just really grift. Like if you look at the co-founder of Palantir, for example, recently he went on a rant on how U.S. must win the AI war. We cannot let China win the AI race. And I pose a question: who do you guys want to win? Do you want Palantir to win or China to win? That is a real question that Alex Karp is posing here. And but fundamentally, a lot of these proponents of U.S. imperialism and U.S. primacy, all these boosters are essentially grifters. They're grifter, so they can redirect the money into their own pet project. For Alex Karp, that's Palantir, and for others, they want money to continue to fuel the AI bubble that blow up their own net worth. But nobody is really serious about actually build up America again to bring industry back to United States. That's never seriously in the cards, and they are now betting everything on AI, on AGI, artificial general intelligence. The idea is that once U.S. develops Skynet and Terminator, you'll be over for everybody else. This is why we have to get there first, which is kind of preposterous, because even if that happened, even if the AGI, let's say, even if AGI does happen, U.S. get to there first. Judging by the current rate, China will probably just get there like a few months later. And then what's the United States gonna do in like a matter of a few months? Probably not much. And because ultimately you cannot run an economy without manufacturing. And China is a manufacturing superpower right now. They're actually applying AI in useful stuff like advanced manufacturing and robotics, where China is leading. Whereas in US, it's all this money is being invested in large language models that's just basically chatbots, and they promise the pie in the sky that once we achieve AGI, we can fire all these white collar workers, and you have all these like basically essentially PhD working for you 24/7. You'll be great abundance. Well, of course, it will be great abundance for the Silicon Valley tech lords, and maybe not so much for the rest of the peons that they don't really consider much anyway.
Yeah, great points, Carl. Well, KJ, I'm curious about what you believe underlies not only this visit, but how it connects to the kind of domestic crises of legitimacy that we were discussing earlier. There was this interesting piece in a very Zionist publication called The Tablet based in New York, called Farewell to the Abraham Accords. So in this article, the author argues that the Abraham Accords are actually that important at the moment in terms of normalizing with Israel. What is important, though, is to pivot toward China. MBS's White House visit marked a return to normalcy in the Middle East and a U.S. pivot toward China, concluding, and I'll just read this here, he's already had a big victory in the Middle East. Trump has a win much more significant and durable than a normalization agreement. Not only did he, in partnership with Netanyahu, eliminate the Iranian threat, he also revived U.S.-led regional order that is crucial to American peace and prosperity. Israel is America's regional enforcer and a good destination for tech investors. The Saudis pump cheap oil to stabilize global energy markets, buy U.S. arms systems, and invest in U.S. industry. That's a regional order that works well for everyone, including the United States. Now it's time for the Middle East to get out of in the black hole in the middle of it, the Palestinians off the front page, the black hole in the middle of it, the Palestinians off the front page, and turn to the bigger issue from which Trump's historical legacy will rest. China. To you, KJ.
Well, I think that's a pretty accurate assessment in that the plan always has been to pivot to China, and everything else that we're seeing are steps along the way. You know, the genocide of the Palestinians, you know, cleaning up Central and Western Asia, knocking out or trying to bleed out Russia. All of these are steps on the plan to the ultimate goal, which is war with China. I've, you know, described it as, you know, a multi-course meal, but the main dish is China. And in that context, we can understand that Mohammed bin Salman's visit is also a way of seeing if he can be peeled off away from his alliance, burgeoning alliance, and the alliance of the Gulf states with China as part of the BRICS, and also whether you know, he can also be prompted to pay down in cash. It's really a kind of you know, feudal type of tribute taking at this point, where all the countries of the world are simply expected to cough up cash for the United States, almost as a kind of a quantitative easing, if you will, but from other treasuries. You know, you're correct. The GDP of Saudi Arabia is somewhere between 1 trillion and 1.2 trillion. And so essentially, if they were to hand over $1 trillion, you know, that's their entire GDP handed over to Trump. The same thing with South Korea, similar with Japan. All the countries are simply being bled out and asked to pay tribute. And this has to do with the fundamental contradictions of capitalism. We know that the Western empire is collapsing. We know that this has to do with the fundamental contradictions of monopoly capital, in that everything financializes, money chases money without producing anything productive in between. And under that circumstance, you know, the vampire needs the continual infusion of fresh blood simply to keep going. It's no longer a living being. I mean, I think, you know, Thiel is a good example. Peter Thiel is a good example of this. He doesn't even look alive. He looks like death warmed over, or the, you know, the warmed over corpse of Roy Cohn. But essentially, the vampire needs fresh blood to be continually infused into its system. And that is the tribute that is being demanded. And of course, yes, it is purely a grift. It is purely a financial grift. But this is the system that we are currently facing. And the ultimate resolution of this, as I pointed out in, you know, this pessimistic fashion, but I believe accurate fashion, is that the ultimate reboot button is global war, which includes, you know, essentially a war with China. And that's why we see all these other developments that, you know, for example, the recent publication of the upside down map of the USFK, where they point out that they are in a very, very advantageous position to wage war against China. They're no longer even using the pretense of containment or deterrence. They're simply, you know, we are going to impose costs, i.e. we're going to attack and wage war with China. So I think that what we're seeing here is the kind of necrotic dimension or the necrotic symptoms of a failing symptom and of a failing system, and they're no longer bothering to even disguise the actions that they're taking.
Yeah, to you, Warwick.
Yeah, look, one of the funny things about the efforts to compel other countries to recycle US dollars back into the American system is that I think Trump works on the idea that US dollars is scarce and therefore he needs to go and hoover up as much of it as he can, forgetting in fact that he sits in a position that enables the creation of US dollars itself. So that's not really what's going on, I think. I mean, it does lubricate the system, but I think Trump actually starts from a misconceived foundation in any case. The second thing is that there is a gap between ambition and reality, and that is that you only recycle what you can recycle regardless. Recycling happens in any case, and much of this is packaged up old news, but it enables headlines to be created which talk about this idea of these wins. The more interesting aspects, I think, of the relationships, if you will, over the last few months in relation between the United States and Saudi Arabia goes to the discussions that happened some months ago concerning Saudi commitments to purchase more American military equipment. And again, that comes across as a very significant thing, but it is ultimately hamstrung by the material constraints that the United States military industrial complex actually faces. It can have as many forward orders as it wants, but it's still got to deliver on those. And at the moment, it actually struggles to deliver on its own military requirements, let alone the promises that it's making to the rest of the world. So its ability to walk the walk, I think, ultimately will be tested by a military industrial system that has been heavily financialized with limited material and engineering capacity. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing that's probably worth noting, and it goes back to some of the Marjorie Taylor Greene stuff and some of the earlier comments, I guess, is that the political mandate that the American elite has now is actually incredibly fragile, far more fragile than many people think. The toing and froing from Trump himself over the course of the last 10 to 11 months has, of course, I think, undermined a lot of the authority that came with his inauguration. Promises around solving wars in 24 hours and releasing files and they're not releasing files. All of this stuff corrodes the moral authority, if anything, and the political authority that comes with being a newly elected president. His numbers, his approval numbers are historically low. They're in the mid to high 30s, and that really reflects the fact that the coalition that was assembled around a politics of cultural grievance without an economic program ultimately is unraveling because it can't deliver on the economic program, and the cultural grievances actually peel away many of the festering sores that have long been hidden away by an elite on both sides of the political fence who have a shared interest in keeping some of the more sordid details of elite life under wraps. So the mandate is actually quite fragile. Lastly, the fragility of this mandate is evidenced by the fact that we had recent elections in New York and other parts of the United States, some special elections, which quite clearly showed that the American voters in these places were willing to overturn long histories of voting behaviour as a consequence, largely, I think, of a political elite and an administration that has failed to deliver on cost of living questions. And you add that to the fact that the administration, like all administrations in the US, is actually elected by a relatively small proportion of eligible adults. Trump is president because of an electoral college system that has been designed from the very get-go to disproportionately favour small rural or agrarian states. That has been tremendously beneficial for the Republicans in recent times. And it also means, though, that a president actually ends up being elected in effect on the back of about 33% or thereabouts of eligible voters. That's actually not the foundations of a strong mandate to do very much at all.